Hello and welcome. This is Philosophy 6301, Professional Ethics. So this is a professional ethics course. First, I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Charles Hayes. You can call me Charles. These days, I live in Western Colorado, near Durango, but in the kind of deserty part of Colorado. But I'm from West Virginia. So think forest, banjos, Appalachia, West Virginia. That's where I'm from. A little bit about me. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So honestly, that experience was really intimidating for me. But it was a philosophy course, kind of a lot like this, that in my first year made me fall in love with learning. And I've been hooked ever since. So that's what I do now. I teach philosophy. So I study philosophy of all kinds, but I specialize in environmental ethics. I'm fascinated with how people understand their environments and how they make decisions about shaping them, about forests and cities and whatnot, all environments. My work covers very practical issues like water rights, ranching on public land, as well as broader, more theoretical issues like what is nature? What is wilderness? Things like that. Do we have ethical obligations to non-humans? And if so, how and why? That's a lot of what my work does. But I've taught philosophy in traditional classrooms at the University of Montana, Fort Lewis College in Colorado, Michigan State University. But I also teach non-traditional kind of outdoor classes where I take people out on public lands and teach a little bit of ecology, public land policy, and like what we're studying in this course, ethical theories. What is ethics? Where do these ideas come from? Good, bad, right, wrong, beautiful, and ugly. Are those ethical theories? We kind of get into all that. So that's what I do, mostly environmental ethics. But this isn't an environmental ethics course. This is a professional ethics course. And so, second part, I want to get a little bit into what this course is about and why study ethics. So I think when I first started studying ethics, I imagined what are we really studying? If we study each ethical theory, are they going to give us completely different answers on what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to live? And sometimes they do. But really, the study of ethics isn't so much about discovering what you're supposed to do. You usually have a tradition and a culture and a knowledge about how to do that already. Like you already know you shouldn't steal. You already know you shouldn't lie. You already know honesty is good. You already know integrity is good. The study of ethics is to get down and to understand the reasons why you can defend these things, right? The justifications for these things. And this is where it gets interesting, the different types of justifications of these things. So you can have two people that agree, oh, lying is wrong, but they have different reasons for why they think lying is wrong. And that's what we want to explore in this class. And that broader understanding of understanding the various types of reasons why is where ethics gets really interesting and where you understand an ethical concept so much more deeply. Because if it's just an issue of lying or it's just an issue of stealing or something, you might know, okay, you shouldn't do that. But you actually understand the phenomenon more complexly, more interestingly, when you get down into the various ways you can view this issue. And so we're going to learn in this class a lot of very practical things about professional and business ethics in the workplace, in professions, sure. But what we're going to use to analyze these things are different ethical theories. And ethical theories, I like to think of as glasses you put on, lenses you look through, and they show you, they highlight certain aspects of our ethical lives that are worth our consideration. So an ethical theory is like a lens, and we're going to learn multiple theories, and there are lots of ethical theories. We're mainly going to learn three, because there are three broad types of ethical theories. And think of them like lenses you put on. Now, what's the first lens? The first thing we're going to learn is consequences and utilitarianism, a certain type of looking at consequences. So you have an event in your life, you want to ethically evaluate it. Well, you might look at, what are the consequences of the action? Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? Are they going to be good for the most? Are they going to be bad for the most? Are they going to be good for me, but bad for others? You look at the consequences of the action, and some ethical theories say, well, what makes an action right is when it produces good consequences for the most. That's one kind of theory. And that those glasses you put on will focus and they'll say, okay, what are the consequences of this action? That's a type of theory. Second type of theory we'll look at is about fairness, fairness and justice. Now, when we think of fairness and justice, these are concepts that are right and wrong despite the consequences. You might say, oh, this could have bad consequences. It's going to make life tough. It's going to be harder, but it's the right thing to do. Now, that's not about consequences at all. Whenever you're saying it's the right thing to do, no matter the consequences, well, then the word right there must mean something else, right? And so theories that focus on fairness, duty, justice, these are based on rational principles for action. And what you're trying to do is avoid contradiction. You're trying to say, I can't say something's right for me, but wrong for you, or that you're not allowed to do that, but I'm allowed to do that, right? That's contradiction. Doesn't matter if it has good consequences. So you might think, well, in this case, if I steal, it's going to have great consequences for these people. This, it's fine, but I wouldn't accept someone else stealing. Well, that's a contradiction. That's the root of unfairness, of injustice, right? So that's a different kind of moral theory where we look not at the consequences of our actions, but we look at the rational consistency of our reasons. Very different. Okay, third type of theory. Oh, you're going to learn. Virtues and vices. You know the word virtues and vices. To be gracious, kind, a good friend, loving, considerate, temperate, just, right? Virtues. Vices, you might have greedy, impatient, slovenly, right? Lazy, right? And then vices like smoking or drinking or something, right? Bad things. Well, what are virtues and vices? Virtues and vices are not really rules. They're not really principles. They're not about consequences, and they're not about rational consistency. They're about something else. Another part of our ethical lives, and this is another set of glasses we put on, is our character, right? We become different types of people over time. We become kinder or we become more rude, right? We become more patient or we become more impatient. This is our character, the kinds of people we become. This is a totally different theory of ethics where we say, what's going to matter and how we should judge our actions is what kind of person are we becoming when we do those kinds of activities or that kinds of thought or that kind of action. So that's just three loose theories: consequences, the rational consistency of our reasons, fairness, and then the virtues and vices, the kinds of character we become. I'm just going to leave you with that for now, because what we're going to do in this class, we're going to look at professional ethics and business ethics, very practical concerns of everyday business life. And we're going to look at them with different lenses and say, okay, when is it appropriate? When is it most appropriate to look at the consequences? When is it most appropriate to care about the rational consistency of our reasons? And when is it most appropriate to care about the virtues and vices, the ways we're forming and shaping the kinds of people we want to become, right? And this class will look at issues through all those lenses and a few more. So that's where I'm basically going to wrap it up. I think the one theme, though, I do want you to understand in this class is when you move forward in ethics, when you progress in ethical understanding, what you're doing is you're understanding things more broadly. You're seeing that one situation in life can be seen has so much content to it and can be seen in a bunch of different ways. This is not to say that there's not very true ways of seeing it and very false ways of seeing it. Truth, falsehood, very serious, very real. But life is complex. And so lots of things are true without contradiction. And so the consequences do matter. The rational consistency of our reasons does matter. The virtues and vices does matter. And all those things are happening at the same time in our ethical lives. And so when we want to understand our ethical lives more deeply, the point is for breadth. We want to understand them through different theories, as many as possible. And the broader your understanding gets, the more complete picture you're getting. And I want to make a soft point. I did not say anything about relativism or the idea that a bunch of things could be true at once that are contradictory. No. I'm saying our life is complex. And so we need a rich, complex understanding. But the true understanding will still all fit with each other, still all comport with each other. So not relativism, breadth, complexity. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you very much. This is just in closing, third part of the introduction. Please feel free to contact me at any time. You can email me, charles.hayes@columbia-southern.edu. You can also message through the Blackboard. That's the easiest. And email whenever you want, ask a question whenever you want. No questions too small. I'm here to answer it. And I can also sometimes do a video call if you'd like. So just email me to schedule one and I can answer your questions, hopefully, or guide you or point you to someone else who might answer the questions. But all right, thank you very much. I'm Charles. Looking forward to the course.